My husband accused me of cheating after 35 years of marriage. 3 weeks later, a DNA test exposed a secret that cost him everything. But the DNA result wasn't the most shocking part. The most shocking part was discovering that the man sitting across from me at dinner had been quietly planning to take my inheritance for months. And if I hadn't found one folder by accident, he might have succeeded. Before I tell you what happened, I want to ask you something. What would you do if the person you trusted most suddenly looked you in the eye and accused you of something you didn't do? Because that's exactly where this nightmare began. And I never saw it coming. It was a Tuesday. Nothing special. The kind of evening that disappears into memory. Chicken roasting in the oven. The local news playing softly in the background. My husband, Richard, scrolling through his phone. Me setting the table. Normal. Comfortable. Safe. Or at least that's what I thought. I was carrying a bowl of vegetables to the table when Richard looked up. His expression immediately made me uneasy. Not angry. Not sad. Cold. Like he had already made a decision. I sat down. Picked up my fork. And then he said it. You've been cheating on me. The room went silent. I actually laughed. A short nervous laugh. Very funny. He didn't smile. My stomach dropped. Richard? His eyes never left mine. I know you've been seeing someone. I stared at him. Waiting for the punchline. It never came. Are you serious? Tell me the truth. The way he said it sent chills down my spine. Not because he sounded hurt. Because he sounded prepared. Like he had rehearsed this conversation. Like he wanted me to react. My hands started shaking. What are you talking about? You've changed. I've changed? You're distant. I blinked. Richard, I've been helping your mother every week. No response. I've been handling paperwork for your uncle's estate. Silence. I've been organizing my father's inheritance documents. The moment I said inheritance, something flickered across his face. It was gone almost immediately. But I saw it. And I would remember it later. Because that tiny reaction explained everything. I just didn't know it yet. We had been married for 35 years. Not perfect. No marriage is. But stable. Predictable. Comfortable. We lived in suburban Ohio. A quiet neighborhood where people waved from their driveways. Where nothing dramatic ever happened. Richard worked in finance. I spent 30 years teaching before retiring. We talked about retirement. Travel. Grandchildren someday. The future. Looking back now, I realize something terrifying. You can share a house with someone for years. And still not know who they really are. When my father passed away, he left me a modest inheritance. A house. A small investment account. Nothing extravagant. But it meant everything to me. My father worked his entire life for it. And he wanted me to have it. At first Richard seemed supportive. Very supportive. Too supportive. Do you need help reviewing the documents? No, I'm okay. You should let me look them over. I already have an attorney. You know I understand financial matters better than most people. At the time, I thought he was being helpful. Now I know he was gathering information. Studying the situation. Looking for opportunities. And he wasn't subtle about it. One evening he sat beside me while I reviewed estate paperwork. Who's listed on everything? I looked up. What do you mean? The house. The account. The beneficiaries. I shrugged. Me. He smiled. But there was something strange about it. Something calculating. That's good. Then he added. We should probably discuss how everything fits into our long-term plans. Our plans. Not mine. Our. The comment bothered me. But I ignored it. Because that's what people do when they trust someone. They explain away things that don't make sense. The next morning Richard acted as though nothing had happened. No apology. No explanation. Nothing. At breakfast he poured himself coffee and asked, "What are your plans today?" I stared at him. "You accused me of cheating last night." He sipped his coffee. I asked a question. My heart started pounding. This wasn't normal. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was intentional. "Richard, where is this coming from?" He finally looked at me. "You know exactly where it's coming from." "No, I don't." His expression hardened. "Then maybe you're a better liar than I thought." Those words hit harder than the accusation itself. Because suddenly I understood something. He wanted me defensive. He wanted me emotional. He wanted me confused. And I had no idea why. 3 days later something happened that changed everything. I was looking for a utility bill. Richard was at work. I walked into his home office. Opened a drawer. And found something I wasn't supposed to see. Or maybe. Something he wanted me to see. A manila folder. Unsealed. Sitting right on top. Almost impossible to miss. My instincts told me to leave it alone. I didn't. And thank God I didn't. Because inside that folder was the first real clue. Printed emails. Financial notes. Legal discussions. Then one sentence stopped me cold. If she initiates divorce, the inheritance claim becomes significantly weaker. I read it again. And again. My inheritance. Why were strangers discussing my inheritance? Why was Richard involved? And why was divorce even part of the conversation? I felt sick. Then I turned the page. And everything got worse. Buried beneath the emails was a DNA testing brochure. My heart skipped. I pulled it out. There was a lab request form attached. And my name was already written on it. For a moment I couldn't breathe. What was I looking at? Why would Richard order a DNA test? And why was my name on the paperwork? Then I saw another name. My son. I nearly dropped the papers. My son was 34 years old. 34. Why would anyone need a DNA test after 34 years? Unless. No. That didn't make sense. Nothing about this made sense. But one thing became painfully clear. Richard wasn't accusing me because he believed I cheated. He was building something. A story. A case. A strategy. The question was, why? And the answer was far worse than I imagined. Have you ever discovered something that instantly changed the way you saw a person? Because from that moment forward, I couldn't stop wondering. Who exactly had I been married to for the last 35 years? That night I waited. The folder sat on the kitchen table. The DNA brochure on top. Richard walked in. He froze. For just a second. Then the mask returned. "What's this?" I asked. He set down his briefcase. "You tell me." I held up the paperwork. Why is my name on a DNA test request? No hesitation. No embarrassment. No guilt. It's for your son. My son? You heard me. I stared at him. My son is 34 years old. He shrugged. You never know. The room went silent. Those 3 words felt like a slap. You never know. Not I'm sorry. Not I made a mistake. Not let's talk. Just. You never know. And in that moment, a terrible realization began forming. This wasn't about cheating. It wasn't about trust. It wasn't even about family. Somehow, this was about money. And whatever Richard was planning, he wasn't finished yet. That night I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that folder. The emails. The inheritance discussions. The DNA paperwork. By morning, I knew I needed advice. Real advice. Not from Richard. Not from family. Not from friends. I called the attorney who had helped my father prepare his estate. Margaret. A woman who had spent 30 years protecting people from financial disasters. When she answered, I immediately heard concern in her voice. Are you okay? No. The word came out faster than I expected. And for the next 15 minutes, I told her everything. The accusation. The DNA test. The inheritance documents. The emails. The silence on the other end became longer with every detail. Finally she spoke. Has your husband shown unusual interest in your inheritance recently? I laughed nervously. That's an understatement. Another pause. Then she said something that made my blood run cold. You need to protect your assets immediately. I sat upright. What? Listen carefully. I can't make accusations without evidence. But what you're describing doesn't sound like a husband looking for truth. My stomach tightened. It sounds like someone preparing for a financial conflict. Financial conflict? The phrase wouldn't leave my head. Because suddenly dozens of moments from the past year started replaying. Richard asking about beneficiaries. Richard asking about ownership. Richard asking about legal structures. Richard suggesting joint accounts. Richard offering to simplify paperwork. At the time I thought he was helping. Now every memory felt different. Like watching the same movie after learning the ending. And the ending wasn't good. Over the next week Richard became strangely helpful. Too helpful. One afternoon he walked into the living room carrying coffee. My favorite kind. He handed me a mug. Smiled. And sat down beside me. We need to stop fighting. The sudden kindness felt unnatural. I nodded cautiously. Okay. I love you. My chest tightened. Because something about the way he said it felt rehearsed. Then he added. We should update some paperwork together. There it was. Again. Paperwork. Money. Assets. Always assets. I kept my expression neutral. What paperwork? Oh, just making sure everything is protected. Protected. That word almost made me laugh. Because suddenly I realized something. Richard wasn't trying to save our marriage. He was trying to save his position. A few days later our son came over. I hoped things would feel normal. Instead, they became worse. Much worse. Halfway through dinner Richard casually brought up the DNA test. In front of everyone. I nearly dropped my fork. My son stared. Dad, what? Richard leaned back. I'm just looking for answers. My son's face turned pale. What answers? Silence. Then Richard said the one thing I never expected. Maybe we don't know as much about our family as we think. The room froze. My son looked at me. Confused. Hurt. Searching my face for answers I didn't have. And for the first time, I saw exactly what Richard was doing. He wasn't accusing me privately anymore. He was planting doubt publicly. The following week he brought the DNA kit home. Not suggested. Not discussed. Brought. And placed it in the center of the kitchen table. Like evidence. Like a weapon. I already paid for it. I stared at him. You already paid? Yes. Without talking to anyone? His jaw tightened. If nobody has anything to hide, then what's the problem? The manipulation was so obvious now. But what shocked me most was this. He actually seemed confident. Certain. As if he expected the results to support him. And that terrified me. Because confidence usually comes from information. Information I didn't have. What would you do? Refuse the test? Or take it and risk finding out something that could destroy your family? Because that's exactly where we were. And honestly, I wasn't sure which choice scared me more. The samples were collected. Mailed. And suddenly our home became unbearable. Every conversation felt forced. Every silence felt dangerous. Every glance carried suspicion. Not from me. From Richard. Almost like he couldn't wait for the results. Like he needed them. Like his entire plan depended on them. One night I woke up around 2 a.m. Richard wasn't in bed. I found him downstairs. Sitting in his office. Staring at inheritance documents. Again. Not family photos. Not marriage records. Not memories. Inheritance paperwork. That's when I knew. Without question. Money was at the center of this. I just didn't know how. Yet. The email arrived on a Thursday morning. I knew immediately. Richard practically sprinted to his office. Minutes later I heard movement. Then silence. Then more silence. Too much silence. Something was wrong. I walked toward the office. The door was open. Richard sat frozen in front of the screen. His face looked strange. Not triumphant. Not relieved. Terrified. My heart started racing. What happened? No answer. Richard? Slowly he turned toward me. His hands were shaking. And suddenly I understood something. Whatever he expected. He hadn't gotten it. He finally spoke. You aren't his biological mother. For a moment I thought I misheard him. What? He turned the screen toward me. The report was right there. Cold. Clinical. Scientific. And completely impossible. I stared. Then stared again. Then laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it was absurd. I gave birth to my son. I remembered every second of it. The labor. The hospital room. The first cry. The first time I held him. This result wasn't just wrong. It was impossible. Yet Richard looked almost desperate for it to be true. And that's when something hit me. Why was he so focused on my result? Why wasn't he talking about his own? Because attached to the report was another file. One he hadn't mentioned. One he clearly hoped I wouldn't notice. I clicked it. And the room changed. Instantly. The second report wasn't about me. It wasn't about my son. It was about Richard. And what it revealed would destroy everything. I opened the file. Read the first page. Then the second. Then looked up at him. His face had gone completely white. Suddenly I understood. The accusation. The pressure. The manipulation. The inheritance obsession. The fear. The desperation. All of it. Because the secret Richard had spent years hiding was finally staring back at him from his own DNA report. And there was no way to explain it away. No way to manipulate it. No way to blame someone else. For the first time since this nightmare began, Richard looked scared. Not of me. Of the truth. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The office felt smaller. The air felt heavier. Richard sat frozen in his chair. I looked down at the report again. Then back at him. Then back at the report. My heart pounded. Because what I was reading shouldn't have been possible. The DNA results showed that Richard was not biologically related to the man he had believed was his father his entire life. Not remotely. Not even close. The silence stretched. Finally, I spoke. Richard. His jaw tightened. Don't. Did you know? I said don't. His voice cracked. That was the first time I saw genuine fear. Not anger. Not control. Fear. Because for the first time since this nightmare began, he wasn't holding the cards anymore. The truth was. And the truth wasn't on his side. Everything suddenly started making sense. Every strange conversation. Every inheritance question. Every suspicious document. Every accusation. Every attempt to make me look guilty. I sat down slowly. You knew something was coming, didn't you? Richard stared at the floor. No answer. That's why you pushed the DNA test. Silence. That's why you accused me. Still nothing. Then he finally looked up. And the hatred in his eyes shocked me. Not because it was directed at me. Because it was directed at reality itself. You don't understand. Then explain it. You can't. Try me. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he laughed. A bitter, defeated laugh. And suddenly years of carefully maintained control started crumbling. What he told me next made my stomach drop. 6 months earlier, Richard had discovered inconsistencies in old family records. Dates. Birth certificates. Hospital information. Things that didn't add up. At first he ignored them. Then he became obsessed. He hired researchers. Ordered records. Tracked family history. And eventually found enough evidence to suspect the truth. The man whose estate he expected to inherit from might not actually be his father. That possibility terrified him. Because Richard wasn't just emotionally invested. He was financially invested. His future plans depended on it. His retirement plans. His expectations. His sense of entitlement. Everything. And the closer he got to the truth, the more desperate he became. 2 days later my attorney called. And what she uncovered made everything worse. Much worse. Sit down, she said. The words instantly made me nervous. What happened? We found financial activity. My heart sank. What kind of activity? Another pause. Then she answered. The kind that suggests planning. Planning. Not reacting. Planning. My stomach twisted. Over the next hour, she walked me through document after document. Emails. advisor meetings, asset projections, legal consultations, inheritance calculations, contingency plans. My name appeared everywhere. My inheritance appeared everywhere. My father's estate appeared everywhere. And suddenly the full picture became horrifyingly clear. Richard hadn't simply become interested in my inheritance. He had built a strategy around it. A detailed strategy. A calculated strategy. A strategy that assumed he would eventually gain access to portions of it. The room spun. 35 years. 35 years together. And somehow, I was looking at paperwork that treated my future like an investment opportunity. Then my attorney showed me one final email. One sentence. Just one. But it changed everything. If her credibility is damaged first, negotiations become significantly easier. I read it twice. Then 3 times. My hands started shaking. Because suddenly I understood. The cheating accusation. The DNA test. The public doubt. The humiliation. It was never about discovering truth. It was about destroying mine. If people believed I was dishonest, then everything else became easier. Divorce. Asset negotiations. Inheritance challenges. Control. I felt physically sick. The man I married hadn't simply doubted me. He had attempted to discredit me. Strategically. Imagine discovering that someone you trusted for nearly 4 decades had quietly built a plan around your financial future. Would you forgive them? Or would that betrayal change everything? Because for me, something broke that day. And it could never be repaired. News travels fast. Especially when lawyers get involved. My son called first. Then Richard's mother. Then extended family. Questions came from every direction. What happened? Is it true? How long has this been going on? But one conversation stayed with me. Richard's mother. She was crying. Softly. Painfully. I never knew. I closed my eyes. Neither did I. I don't know what to say. For a moment neither of us spoke. Then she whispered something heartbreaking. I don't recognize my own son anymore. Neither did I. For weeks I had been reacting. Defending. Explaining. Surviving. That ended immediately. I hired a financial investigator. I secured every inheritance account. Every document. Every asset. Every property record. Every investment. Everything. Then I did something Richard never expected. I stopped being afraid. Because fear had been his greatest weapon. And once it disappeared, so did his advantage. The investigator worked quickly. Very quickly. And what he found was disturbing. There had been conversations with financial advisors. Discussions about restructuring assets. Hypothetical divorce scenarios. Inheritance projections. Future ownership possibilities. Nothing technically illegal. But morally? The damage was devastating. Because every document confirmed the same thing. Richard wasn't protecting our marriage. He was protecting his financial future. And he had been preparing for months. Maybe longer. 3 weeks later, I walked into my attorney's office. Signed paperwork. Reviewed documents. And made the hardest decision of my life. I filed for divorce. Not because I wanted revenge. Because I wanted peace. There is a difference. Revenge keeps you connected to the person who hurt you. Peace sets you free. And I was finally ready to be free. Richard came home that evening. The documents were waiting on the dining room table. Divorce filings. Asset protection orders. Legal notices. He stopped walking. The color drained from his face. "What is this?" I didn't answer. He already knew. His hands trembled as he flipped through the pages. Then came the anger. The last weapon he had left. "You ruined everything." I looked at him calmly. For months I would have cried. For months I would have defended myself. Not anymore. No. His eyes narrowed. "You did." The silence that followed felt enormous. Then he slammed the papers down. "This is because of that test." I shook my head. "No." "What then?" I looked directly at him. "This is because of the truth." For the first time in 18 years. Richard had absolutely nothing to say. The divorce process moved faster than anyone expected. Once the evidence surfaced, the negotiations changed dramatically. The inheritance remained protected. The assets tied to my father stayed mine. The legal strategies Richard had spent months developing collapsed. One after another. Every assumption. Every projection. Every plan. Gone. But karma wasn't finished. Because the inheritance Richard spent years expecting from his father's side? The inheritance that fueled so much of his panic? The inheritance that pushed him toward manipulation? It was never his. Not legally. Not biologically. Not financially. The future he sacrificed his marriage for never existed. Imagine that. Losing the person you claimed to love, while chasing money that was never yours to begin with. 6 months later, my home felt different. Quieter. Lighter. Peaceful. I spent more time with my son. More time with friends. More time living. The constant tension was gone. The suspicion was gone. The manipulation was gone. And for the first time in years, I felt free. Not because everything was perfect. Because everything was honest. And honesty is worth more than comfort built on lies. I used to believe betrayal came from strangers. From outsiders. From people who never truly cared. But life taught me a harder lesson. Sometimes betrayal comes from the person sitting across the dinner table. The person who knows your fears. Your dreams. Your weaknesses. And your trust. But I learned something else too. You can survive betrayal. You can survive humiliation. You can survive lies. And sometimes, the very thing meant to destroy you becomes the thing that saves you. Because Richard wanted a DNA test to expose me. Instead, it exposed him. And that changed everything.
Thanking you for watching Revenge Echo channel. Like, subscribe and comment where you are watching from.